Good afternoon, everyone. Congresswoman Maxine Waters proudly represents the 43rd District of California, which includes about half of Torrance, parts of South Los Angeles, Gardena, Harbor City, Harbor Gateway, Hawthorne, Inglewood, Lawndale, Lenox, Lomita, Playa del Rey, Playa Vista, West Athens, Westmont, West Carson, and Westchester. Elected in November 2018 to her 15th term, Congresswoman Waters is now the chairperson of the House Financial Services Committee, the first African American and the first woman to hold this important position. She's also a member of the House Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, and she is the co-chair of the Alzheimer's Disease Task Force. She is easily one of the most recognized members of House leadership. It's my great honor to introduce Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I'm especially honored to be asked, along with Ted Lieu, every year to come to give the State of the Region address. I think that it is extremely important to respond to the request, because I believe that the Torrance Chamber of Commerce is the best chamber of commerce in the whole United States of America. And so I want to thank Serena Josel of Kaiser Permanente for that introduction. And of course, always my thanks to the Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce. The Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce has done an incredible job. And I want you to know that Donna Duperon is the most active, the most involved, the most committed of anyone that I've ever seen serving as president and CEO of a Chamber of Commerce. She keeps this chamber busy. There is an activity going every week. So give Donna Duperon a big round of applause. And of course, a wonderful team working with John Hefferman, who is the chairman of the board, and for all of the time and hard work that he puts into this chamber. He too is very dedicated, and he is absolutely committed to serving the people of Torrance. Give him a big round of applause. I'm delighted to be here with Ted Lieu. He is one of our young, active members of the Congress of the United States of America. He's now in a special position in the leadership that he will tell you something about. And of course, in addition to that, he is known as one of the most successful and accomplished tweeters in Washington, D.C. His leadership does not go unnoticed. Give him a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, normally when Ted and I come, we are trying to do everything that we can to identify what we're doing in Washington, D.C. and how it relates to the region. And so normally we will be talking about transportation issues as it relates to the efforts in the South Bay. We will be talking about issues of concern to our local business community, on, and we're going to do some of that today. But I know you want to hear about what's going on in Washington. Or maybe you don't. First, I would like to say to Mayor Pat Fury and Terry, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being an involved mayor who shows up at every event. He's always there. And of course, he just got back from Washington not too long ago. And he's reminding me how cold it is back there. But he's also reminding me about what this city and what this region cares about, this area. And so they're always there as advocates, speaking on behalf of not only the city, but the region, and helping us to understand how we can focus our attention on issues that will make the quality of life much better for the people who live here. Give them a big round of applause. I want to let you know that I was elected by my colleagues to become the chair of the very important Financial Services Committee of the Congress of the United States. And I have served on that committee for 28 years. So I think I know something about it. And I'm very pleased and honored that I'm going to have an opportunity to have hearings and oversight and some investigations in that committee that have been ignored for far too long. I want you to know that I started out with my first hearing was on homelessness. Homelessness, as you know, is a real problem throughout this country. And no matter where you come from, what community you're in, there are people who are living in tents, under bridges, in your backyard sometimes, because they really don't have a place to live. And the most shameful thing about homelessness is that we have veterans and families with children who are homeless. And so this committee has HUD. We have HUD in that committee. That's one of the government agencies that we have the oversight responsibility for. But we have not had a hearing on homelessness or the problem of basically rentals and lack of the ability to be owners in this country, because the previous chair just did not think those issues were important. But I think they're very important, and so I have a huge bill that I'm going to reintroduce. I've introduced it twice, and it is a bill to end homelessness forever. I believe that my bill of $13 billion, $13.27 billion, can do that. Now, I want you to know there's been a lot of discussion about the definition of homelessness. And we have homeless advocates who fight each other about how it should be defined. We're going to get rid of that fight. We're going to come together, and we're going to make sure that we have a definition that's fitting and that will serve the people of this country. There's no reason why we should have 500,000 people out on the streets every night. And in our area alone, in the greater Los Angeles area, about 50,000 on the street every night. And so this is something that I'm going to pay an awful lot of attention to. I want you to know that, you know as well as anybody that there's division in Washington, D.C., and that the parties don't work too well together. And of course, we have a lot of the pundits and people from the media who have been predicting what I'm going to do and how I'm going to run the committee. And they said that I was going to be very tough on some people on Wall Street. They said that I was going to do a lot of investigation of this administration. But I want you to know that the ranking member on this committee is a young man that I have gotten to know, and we are working together, and we have 3 bills that are going to be co-sponsored, Democrats and Republicans working together, and those bills will be 3 bills that are very important. The National Flood Insurance Bill. I just heard there was flooding in California, and it has to be reauthorized, and so we're going to work on that. And then we have something called TRIA, and TRIA is basically a program that supports insurance companies when you have disasters and you have catastrophic occurrences where the insurance companies could not have anticipated that in the premiums that they were charging. And so when you have huge venues and hospitals and things that certainly the premiums would not cover the cost of if they have to be redone, if they have to be reconstructed. And so we have a program that will provide support to make sure that these huge and important venues that service all of the people will be reconstructed, will be renovated, will be put back in service. So that's two of those bills that we're working on. And of course, Donna knows about the Export-Import Bank. That's so very important. That got undermined in the last session of Congress, was under attack, and we don't know why, because this EXIM Bank is so very important to helping to support our ability to export to other countries. And when we export, we create jobs. And we have so many countries that would like to have goods and services, and we have so many people prepared to provide those goods and services, but they need some support, they need some help, whether or not it's with insurance, other kinds of things that makes exports very possible. So we're gonna put those three bills up. And we're going to work together, and we're going to show them that the predictions are all wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. When we decide that we can work together and get things done, then we should do it, and we're going to try to be fine examples of that. So I want you to help in every way that you can. When these bills come up, we won't have much opposition. We'll have some opposition. But on some things like EXIM Bank, we have a lot of people who don't understand what it is. And they think it's another bank like a Bank of America, or it is not. And so I want you to write, I want you to tweet, I want you to get on the internet, and I want you to give support to the EXIM Bank, because we have lots of small businesses in this area who are exporters or who would like to be exporters, and they would like to have some support for their government. Will you do that? And so we are experiencing some remarkable things in Washington, D.C. We are experiencing the kinds of decisions, the kinds of initiatives that we never thought we would encounter. And so it is daunting, and we are working in every way that we possibly can to deal with it. Many of you are watching what is going on your television. You're listening to what is being said about certain issues. You're trying to understand what is going on with our foreign relations, and on and on and on. But I bet you in all of that, you were certainly surprised that your government shut down for 35 days. Federal employees who were not paid, who lived paycheck to paycheck. Federal employees who were seeking help for their families with some of our nonprofit organizations all over this country. 800,000 federal employees. Why did that take place? It should not have taken place. It should not be the kind of response when people have differences about how things ought to be done. The big issue that is now taking up so much time and confronting the Congress of the United States have to do with the fact that the President of the United States told everybody that he was going to build a big, beautiful wall. A big, beautiful wall that nobody could climb over. The biggest and most beautiful wall you have ever seen or heard of in your life, and Mexico was going to pay for it. And Mexico told him in very unkind words that that was not going to happen. And so the president still was asking us for $5.7 billion to build this wall. And of course, when he couldn't get what he wanted, he simply used the power of the presidency to shut down this country and shut down all of the federal workers that you heard about, and you wondered what was happening to them and their families. We finally got to the place where our new speaker basically said to him he could not come to the Congress of the United States and give the State of the Union. And so he wanted that platform so bad until he backed down, and he got there, and when he got there, he was greeted by a lot of women in white. And the women in white were the new elected women, and many of the women who have been serving in Congress for so long, who have been wanting to get at some of the issues about family and education and health care and child care, and many of these issues that certainly had been abandoned or forgotten. And so he came and he gave his speech, and the women and Nancy Pelosi gave her clap. And everybody wanted to know, how did she think of that clap? She said, I didn't think of it, it just came and I just did it. And so after that, it was on to getting both sides together with an agreement that they would try and work out the differences and see what they could do to get beyond this situation about the wall. And so they did get together. It was very tough. And they put together a conference committee, and they came out with some very limited funding for, I think, about $1.375 billion for the wall or for the barrier or for whatever it was called. And they put some other money into the effort, talking about how you use new technology and how you use the drones and other kinds of things to deal with securing the border, because everybody wants border security. And, you know, even though sometimes our president talks about he's the only one that cares about security for this country, that is certainly questionable. Because he is absolutely friends with one of the worst enemies of this country, and that is Putin in Russia and the Kremlin. And he said he's in love with Kim Jong-un over in North Korea. And he said, despite the fact that our intelligence committees, our intelligence leaders in the government said to him that Kim Jong-un was still dangerous, and that he still was desirous of deploying missiles at any time. And the president answered by saying to our intelligence leaders that he didn't believe that was true because Putin told him so. And so we have real concerns. I'm not only concerned about the divisions that are being created in our country, I'm concerned about what is being thought of us in foreign countries. And I'm concerned about the way that we are being received or not being received. You've been watching television, and I think that perhaps you saw a recent conference in Munich dealing with security, where the vice president announced greetings from the President of the United States of America, and there was dead silence. No response. That has never happened to us in the United States of America. And so while I may not be talking a lot today about some of the issues I normally talk about with transportation and about what the efforts are of the small business community in developing, et cetera, I want us all to be concerned about our country, about our democracy, about respect for our Constitution. It is because when we understand the importance of the democracy, and when we are dedicated to the proposition that the Constitution means something, we won't have the kind of division that we're seeing now. And it's very important for all of us to stand up for support of the Constitution and our democracy. Now, having said all of that, let me just say that in my committee, I am concerned about everything from predatory lending. I'm concerned about what happens on Wall Street and our major banks. 2008, we went through a meltdown in this country. It was a recession, almost a depression. It was because of the exotic products that had been put on the market by too many of our big banks, by Wall Street. And so we created something called Dodd-Frank Reforms. And the centerpiece of those reforms is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we have to work very hard to protect. There's been all kinds of efforts to undermine it, but under my leadership in that committee, I am going to be concerned about the quality of life for all of the citizens of this country, not just the 1%. The 1% will always be taken care of. Wall Street takes care of itself. But we've got to be concerned about Main Street, and that's what I am concerned about. And I will use this committee to make sure that we pay attention to the needs of our people. And so I'm going to be working, as I said, on homelessness. I'm going to be working on housing and the ability for those who really desire to have a housing to be treated fairly by our banks and our financial institutions. And as you know, since I'm Auntie Maxine, I've got to care about our millennials. I want our millennials to be able to buy a house, to buy a home if they want it. And many of them are not happy with our economy. And so I'm going to be working to make sure that the banks come up with some products that will service them. As a matter of fact, as the CEOs have come in to basically try to find out what I'm thinking, I send them back with mission. The mission is, I want you to have a product for the millennials so that they can buy a home. And of course, I want you to not overrun my committee with efforts that you don't really need. Oftentimes, we get lobbyists and bills from some of our big banks and financial institutions because they're trying to show their investors that they're really looking out for them and that they're going to make sure that they get rid of all the regulations and they're going to make sure that they're able to make more money with new exotic products, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's over. That's not going to happen in this committee. We are going to make sure that we look out for the interests of all of the people. And so when you see these discussions going on, don't walk away or turn your head because they speak in language that they think you don't understand. What they will be talking about is they'll talk about derivatives. They'll talk about the Volcker rule. They'll talk about mirror trading. Listen, I'm going to break all that down so that people understand exactly what it is because I think this language is developed to keep you from knowing what they're doing. And so we're going to run this committee in a very different way, and I hope that it's going to be in a manner that will allow people to use their God-given talent and their earnings to have a good quality of life. Just one more thing I'd like to mention before I exit, because I know that you only have so much time. The credit bureaus. I'm paying attention to the credit bureaus, and I'm having them come in. Equifax has been in, and I want to know what they're doing about cybersecurity. If they don't know, they should talk to Ted Lieu. He's an expert on cybersecurity. And so we can't have all of our personal information hacked and people using that information and they not come up with the systems to protect it. So we're talking with all of the credit bureaus about that. But more than that, we're talking to the credit bureaus about the fact that they're a monopoly and they basically control our lives. And we have not been happy with the fact that when something goes wrong, when their information is not correct, when they get the names mixed up and you try to straighten it out, you're on your own. You're on your own, and oftentimes it will take a year or two when you want to freeze your credit because your credit has been stolen from you. It takes a long time, and we want them to be a part of now supporting all of the consumers so that they have this absolutely control of all of our private information, and they should be more careful in the way that they handle it, and they should be more respectful of the consumers. And I've said to them, I have another challenge for you, and that challenge is this. You get all of our personal information, you determine, and that information determines whether or not we are credit worthy. But in addition to that, you sell that information and you make money on that information. You're making billions of dollars. Why can't the consumer get a piece of the money from the use of their private information? Why can't you find a way to say that In addition to all of the money that they're earning on the sale of your private information, since it's our information, maybe we should get a cut of that also. And so I sent them back to see if they could come up with a plan. They didn't leave my office too happy. But I wanted to talk with them basically about the way that they conduct themselves and their responsibility to us. Now, having said all of that, ladies and gentlemen, my eyes are always on my district and the community. LAX, of course, is in my district, and that footprint is so important to all of us, and the jobs that they create, so important to our families. And it worried me so much when we were shut down because this economic engine that services this whole area was placed at risk. And I want you to know, even though it may not have been told to you in ways that you understand, that the air traffic controllers said, this country is in great danger. I was worried that some of them were on sick out. I was worried that some of them were overworked, long hours. You cannot work air traffic controllers for long hours. When they get weary and they're tired, they can be very dangerous in doing their job. But they sent a message to us, please get it all straightened out and open back up because something bad is going to happen if you don't take care of it. And of course, in addition to me thinking about all of the airports in the country, I certainly was thinking about LAX. I certainly was thinking about our community and what that would mean if somehow those airlines were not available to us to provide the kind of services that they normally provide. With that, let me just say to you, thank you for being a well-organized community. Thank you for being involved in all of those events that Donna Duperon is always creating for all of us. Thank you for being organized in communities where you respond to the problems and the issues that confront your areas. It is not every community that does that. I represent the 43rd Congressional District. It is very diverse, and I have a lot of communities in my district. And I want to tell you that the city of Torrance is the most organized and the most capable of dealing with the issues of the constituents of the city. Thank you so very much, and if Donna would like it, I'll be open to answer questions after we finish with our presentations. Thank you so very much.
Congresswoman, on behalf of the Torrance Area Chamber Board of Directors, we have a thank you gift here for you, some sweets from Kirk's very own Torrance Bakery. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much.
Next up, I'd like to invite Connie Turner from Southern California Edison to the stage. She's going to introduce Congressman Lieu. Connie.
We tease each other because we have compatible roles in 2 different utilities, so we get to meet each other quite frequently. I'd like to welcome Congressman Ted Lieu, 33rd Congressional District, United States House of Representatives. It's a great honor to be able to introduce him as a co-partner to the Congresswoman Maxine Waters. I've known her for many years, so she is quite a pistol up there in Washington. Ted is serving in his 3rd term in Congress and currently sits on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was also elected by his Democratic colleagues to serve as a co-chair of the Democratic Party and Communications Committee. And he's only one of 4 computer science majors currently serving in the Congress. So he does know a little bit about computers and cybersecurity. Without taking up too much of his speaking time, because we definitely want to know what he's involved in Washington, I'd just like to say thank you to Ted's wife, Betty. She's a water commissioner and a former California Deputy Attorney General. And they live, as you know, right here in Torrance with their 2 sons, Brennan and Austin. With that being said, let's bring up the congressman.
Thank you, Connie, for that wonderful introduction. By the way, I was right before this at Evolocity, which is this really cool electric vehicle company in Torrance. And so they need Southern California Edison's help. I was there with my amazing staff, Nico, my district director, and Aurelia, my field representative. And of course, my staff asked the one super important question, which is, hey, are you a member of the Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce? Turns out they're not, so you just might want to, say hi to them. All right. It's my honor to be here along with the Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and the only reason we're even here today is because we funded government last Friday. So sometimes we set out low expectations of American people, and then sometimes we meet them. But I do want to say what an amazing experience it is to be able to work with Maxine Waters. She's a national treasure, and before she became chair, she was in the minority party, and for a very long time, she kept talking and warning us about the excesses of Wall Street. And had we all listened to her last decade, I'm not sure that this recession that Wall Street caused would have happened. I'm so glad that our colleagues elected her as chair of financial services. She's going to do an amazing job and look out for all Americans. So we should give her a big round of applause. And also recognize her husband, Sydney, and all that you do for public service and having been an ambassador. So thank you for your service to the nation as well. And sitting next to Maxine is the love of my life, my wife, Betty. And as some of you may know, she was recently elected to the Torrance School Board. And I want to recognize the Torrance City Mayor, Pat Fury, and his wife, Terry, for their leadership of Torrance, as well as other Torrance Council members. And to my friend Leroy and his staff for all you do for Torrance. I see Superintendent George Madden of the Torrance Unified School District. Thank you for being here. And want to recognize Don Lee on the Torrance School Board, and you have the very best school board in the nation, just being objective about that. And thank you, Donna, for your leadership of the Torrance Chamber, and John for your leadership as well. So I'm going to touch on 3 issues. The first will be on what is happening locally. Then I'm going to talk to you about what is happening in Washington, D.C., and then I'm going to conclude on Yemen, because very few people ever talk about Yemen. So in terms of what's happening locally, the first is infrastructure. I was pleased to have worked with Congresswoman Waters and other members on a bipartisan basis to make sure we got full Phase 1 funding for Metro. We'll continue to make sure we give Metro the funding that they need to build out light rail and subways in Los Angeles, Southern California. And we're working with Metro to make sure that we take the Green Line all the way down here to Torrance. And in addition, we were able to stop Metro from putting in a sort of stupid plan that was going to make it hard for South Bay folks to access the Metro and require more than one stop. So we were able to make sure that didn't happen. In terms of other infrastructure, last term I introduced a bill that would provide $2 trillion of infrastructure funding across America. If you look at the American Society for Civil Engineers report, they say we have a $4 trillion infrastructure deficit. But when I introduced that legislation, even some of my colleagues in my caucus said, oh, that's too expensive. You might have remembered last year when the president gave a State of the Union. He talked about infrastructure, and then he mentioned the figure 1.5 trillion. So I said, see, I wasn't that far off. So I think there's an ability to work together, and hopefully we can get legislation done on infrastructure. Locally, we also do have a homelessness problem. It is something that affects some cities more than others. Much of this is done at the city and county level. However, there are some members who are homeless who happen to be veterans. And so the federal government does have programs to help veterans. Now, one is called HUD-VASH, so it will provide the HUD part, which is housing, and then it provides services through the VASH part. So if you know of any veterans who may be homeless or on the verge of becoming homeless, please let Congresswoman Waters or I know, and we will help them. One of the first bills I got signed into law also revitalized the West LA VA, the largest VA in the nation. It also services Torrance residents. And at its full build out, that will allow the entire campus to have over 1,000 units for housing homeless veterans. We were able to get one building opened up and running a few months ago. We'll plan to get more up and running. And it is an issue that the federal government does actually have resources to help homeless veterans. And then, thank you. And then, in terms of other local issues, I do want to let you know, as some of you may know, I grew up in a family business. I worked in a family business. I worked actually as a kid in a family business because we were free labor. And, but it's very clear to me how important businesses are to not just communities, but to making sure that our economy continues to grow and prosper. So thank you all for everything that you do in terms of helping the community and helping the economy thrive and prosper here in the South Bay. By the way, I have heard, so Congresswoman Waters and I have gone to other events, and I just want to confirm she's actually never said so-and-so chamber is the best in America. So that's quite a compliment to you. And then the last local issue I'm going to touch on is I will shortly be introducing legislation. I sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and it's pretty clear to me that diplomacy happens at a lot of different levels, not just the federal level. So we have a huge number of exchanges that happen within cities of one country and another country. We have city governments that do exchanges between one country and another country. And so what this legislation will do is provide State Department resources to local cities and counties who want to engage in this kind of outreach. And so hopefully we can get that done this term. So in terms of what's happening in the Capitol, I'm not going to be partisan here. I'm just going to be descriptive of what happened last November. So one party ran on lowering healthcare costs, on investing in infrastructure, and on cleaning up corruption in DC. The other party ran on building the wall. The American people made a decision in November, and so Democrats now control the House of Representatives. And for the first year, the House of Representatives is going to deliver on those promises that were made. So I'm just going to talk to you about some of the legislation that is going to come out the first 6 months. We're going to pass out H.R. 1, which is a bill that will reform campaign finance laws, get rid of, as much as we can, corruption in D.C., and also protect voting rights. So that'll be one of the first bills that we'll send out. We also will pass out H.R. 8, which is background checks for guns. I'm on the House Judiciary Committee. Last week, we passed this legislation out of the committee after 10 hours of debate. It was the first gun legislation in over a decade to pass out of this committee, and we intend to get it off the floor of the House by later this month. It has 97% support among the American public, including many gun owners. And what it essentially does is it closes loopholes in background checks. I call it really violent history checks. That's mostly what these background systems are checking for. So right now, if you were to go to a gun dealer and you want to buy a gun, you would submit your information, they run a background check. In 90% of the cases, it takes about a couple minutes, and then you'll get the result. But for some cases, it takes a little bit longer. right now there's sort of a 3-day period. So you could do that and get a gun. Or you could just go to a gun show and buy a gun. No background check, no ID check, nothing. Which makes it sort of silly, right? You have an entire system set up and then people can simply do that. There's additional other loopholes that this bill will close. It is also bipartisan. And so it is our hope that, well, first of all, it will pass the House. It's our hope that the US Senate could also pass it because it does have bipartisan support. Another piece of legislation we're going to pass out is the Equality Act. So right now in America, there are still states where you can get fired based on who you love. And what this bill will do is basically take the Civil Rights Act and put in LGBT so that you cannot be discriminated against based on your status. And we're also going to pass out legislation on reducing healthcare costs in terms of drugs. If you, so there's two things going on. One is prescription drugs, another is generic drugs. I was on the House Oversight Committee in my first term, and we were seeing these spikes in generic drugs, which makes no sense, right? There is no R&D for generic drugs. None of the arguments that pharmaceutical companies use for drug pricing would actually apply to generic drugs. So we were wondering, how come you're getting these massive spikes in generic drugs, some of which help AIDS victims, cancer victims, and other folks. So it turned out that because of the way the FDA operated, there was about a 7 to 8 year delay, backlog, whatever you want to call it, in terms of allowing another manufacturer to make the same generic drug. So some of these companies figured out they can buy a generic drug, and then they would have about 7 years where they could charge any price they want and have basically zero competition. So after we sort of figured that out, we held hearings, we went after the FDA on a bipartisan basis, and the FDA committed that they would lower that timeline to about 8 months. So hopefully we'll see generic drug prices start to drop, and it is simply one of those problems that a monopoly was inadvertently created because of what the FDA was doing. And then in terms of prescription drugs, there will be legislation coming out on that as well. We're also going to be putting out legislation on infrastructure. It's clear that the majority of American people want to see something done on infrastructure. So in addition to building roads, bridges, and highways, my view is in the 21st century, we also have to talk about cyber as part of our infrastructure. It is not good that we've had dams in the United States that have been hacked, right? That's not a good thing. So we need to protect our critical assets in terms of cybersecurity, and then we have to make sure we get rural broadband everywhere in America. So I think that will be a pretty significant piece of legislation. Because it is really big and there's lots of moving parts, that's going to take a little while longer before it comes out. And in terms of one other piece of legislation on cyber, last December, I was very pleased that one of the bills that I introduced, along with Republican Senators Hassan and Portman, was one that made sure that the cybersecurity at our Department of Homeland Security was robust and upgraded. And it did this interesting thing, which is it allowed a program to have DHS go and hire white hat hackers to hack itself, to find out its vulnerabilities. So the Pentagon started this program. It worked well, and as elected officials here know, one of the best things you can do is copy what other places have done. So we basically took that motto and said, DHS, you're going to do the same thing now. And I'm very pleased that the President signed that into law. And now I have additional legislation that does it to the State Department as well. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the national emergency that many of you are aware of, declared on Friday. So I'm just going to give you some facts. Be up to you what you want to do with these facts. So these are undisputable facts because these facts come from the Trump administration. Based on statistics from the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, border apprehensions, which is basically a proxy for how many people actually cross the border, have decreased 75% from 2000 to 2018. That's just a fact. Based on the latest data from the FBI, we know that violent crime is down across the United States. We also know that property crime is down across the United States. And then Based on data from the Department of Homeland Security, we know that in terms of illegal drugs, 80 to 90% of it goes through legal checkpoints, legal ports of entry. So those are what the facts are. And if what the president wants to do is to redirect funds to then build a wall between ports of entry, it's not clear that any of that has anything to do with the facts I just laid out, right? If you really want to stop the flow of illegal drugs, you would upgrade ports of entry. You would make sure they had the technology to scan vehicles much better. We'll give them much more drug detection dogs. We can do all sorts of things to make sure that we do more at our ports of entry to stop the flow of illegal drugs. If you also look at what the president wants to do in terms of redirecting funds, one is he would take billions from the Department of Defense drug and addiction program. Really sort of stupid, right? If your goal is to stop illegal drugs and then take from that program to take a long time to build a wall that doesn't even really apply to ports of entry. So that's just sort of on the facts. By the way, study after study also shows that immigrants, both documented and undocumented, commit less crimes than native-born Americans on a per capita basis, on a proportional basis. However you slice it, immigrants commit less crime. So those are what the facts are. And you have a lawsuit now, you're probably gonna have several lawsuits that occur. One of the great things about our judicial branch is they operate based on facts. And we feel pretty confident that we will win these lawsuits. And one reason is if you just sort of see the timing of this. If this administration thought that this was a winning strategy, they would have declared a national emergency on day one, or 6 months into it, or a year into it. They wouldn't have waited over 2 years, then additional 35 days, and then a little bit more before they did this. So we feel pretty good just based on the facts. And then I'm just gonna talk to you about the law of this. So what happened was that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, right, funded government last week and specifically rejected the president's demand for $5.6 billion for a border wall. He got 1.375. If you look at the way the law is written, there is no way you can say that Congress intended to allow this statute on national emergencies to now let the president do an end run based on what Congress just did on bipartisan basis last week. So the courts would have to sort of say, well, Congress didn't intend to give him this money, but because of this other law Congress passed decades ago, wouldn't let him have that money. That is not a strong legal argument. And then the simplest way to view this is the framers, when they set up our government, they specifically set up these checks and balances, and then they gave the power of the purse to the House of Representatives. There's no way in my mind they would have allowed the president to bypass that very specific power given to the House of Representatives simply by having the president declare a national emergency. That would basically essentially usurp that entire power of appropriations of the House of Representatives. So we feel pretty strongly on that legal argument as well. But even the president can, let's say, win on that national emergency argument, on the law and on the facts. He then faces a secondary argument, which is all this lets him do is he can then access various statutes, a limited number of them, that lets him redirect money. What these statutes actually say is that if you're going to declare national emergency and then direct money from one Department of Defense project to another, it has to be done in support of the armed forces. So it's hard to say that actually it's currently not legal for the armed forces to enforce immigration laws. That's why we have an entire Customs and Border Patrol entity. And if you look at various previous emergency declarations, none of them would be to enforce using DOD money to enforce, which is essentially domestic law. So he would run into that problem as well. And then another statute says, okay, if you're gonna redirect these funds, it's gotta be for an authorized civil work. Well, if Congress just specifically didn't authorize all these billions of dollars for that civil work, I think it's hard for a court to find that in fact somehow this was an authorized work for him to then build the additional wall with that money. And then the last point I'm gonna make on this is, let's say the president wins on all those arguments. At the end of the day, he will be able to do this one time. He will be able to use an additional $6 billion or so of this funding, which will get him approximately 1/10 of his $60 billion wall. And then Congress, from now on, will write in every single appropriations bill, none of this can be used for the wall, notwithstanding national emergency. So that's it. He can, even if he wins all this, he will only get this much. So that's what the administration is faced with. And by the way, lastly, the last pot of money he's going after is military construction, a bunch of which helps military families. So, no one actually ever said, hey, let's go out and hurt military families until this administration came along. So that's what we're looking at. They're going to take money from military families, money from drug and addiction, to then try to build this wall. So we think we're right on the facts, right on law. So we'll see what happens. And then let me conclude on Yemen. So one of the problems with this issue that I've worked on since 2015 is no one has any idea what Yemen is, right? So if you just walk around and said Yemen, people might go, okay, is that a candy? Is it a rock band? Like, what is it? So it's this country that borders Saudi Arabia, and there's been a raging civil war since 2015. I don't have a philosophical problem with the United States helping our allies. Saudi Arabia is an ally. What I do have a problem with is when our ally engages in what are war crimes. So in 2015, reports started coming out in various newspaper articles that the Saudi-led military coalition were doing airstrikes on civilians nowhere near military targets. When I was active duty in the Air Force, one of the things I did is I taught the law of war, also known as the law of armed conflict. I would read these articles and I would think this looks like a war crime. So I wrote a letter at that time about this then very little known war in Yemen to the Pentagon saying, hey, what's the deal with this? Why are we supporting this coalition? What's our national security interests? And why are they engaging in what look like war crimes? Because our personnel are in that kill chain. We were refueling these Saudi jets at the time. In 2016, I authored legislation and then worked with other members of Congress. And the pressure that we put on the Obama administration at the time caused the administration to stop a shipment of precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia. By the way, this is not a partisan issue. This started under a Democratic president and continues under a Republican president. So under the Obama administration, we put all this pressure on the administration and they stopped this shipment. And you might wonder, well, why would you want Saudi Arabia to have more accurate munitions? Because it turned out it wasn't that these Saudi jets were trying to hit, let's say, a moving truck and they missed and struck civilians. It turned out they were intending to strike the targets that they intended to strike. So there was this very large funeral in Yemen, all attended by civilians. These Saudi jets came in, struck it, and hundreds of people got killed or were injured. Then the jets came around again and struck the same exact location. So the Obama administration figured out, okay, these are very precise strikes on civilians. So in addition to funerals, they have struck wedding parties, civilian markets, hospitals, schools, and last year they struck a bus holding over 40 kids. And the Saudis publicly came out and said, yes, they intended to strike that bus. We were very pleased we were able to stop that one shipment. Unfortunately, the current administration has reversed. So what we did, or actually what I did last year is, after doing as much as I could through legislation, press releases, press conferences, and so on, and finally I wrote a letter to the Department of Defense Inspector General of the Pentagon. In that letter, I said this is not an action I wanted to take, but I felt like I was just out of options. And it basically asked for an investigation to see if U.S. personnel were aiding and abetting in war crimes. So this was last August, because again, we're refueling these jets that we know are striking civilians, and to me, we're part of the same chain. And under international law and the law of war, you can be guilty of aiding and abetting war crimes. So we launched that letter last August. A few months later, very pleased that the Trump administration announced they are going to stop refueling Saudi jets in Yemen. So hopefully that will stay. And then just 2 weeks ago, we passed off, actually may have been last week, we passed off the House floor the first time in many, many years, a war powers resolution that basically instructs the administration to completely pull out of Yemen. So that House resolution is exactly the same thing the U.S. Senate passed on a bipartisan basis last December. So it's our hope that the Senate will now take this and then pass that to the president. And at the end of the day, it's not just war crimes that are happening. It's also, you've got an unreliable ally, right? So you now have Saudi Arabia that lured a U.S. resident into one of its embassies, tortured and murdered the person, and then cut them up into little pieces, and then lied to Congress and American people for 17 days about what they did. So that has gotten members on a bipartisan basis pretty riled up. But in addition to that, you have the largest humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen. You have about half the country about to go into famine. You have people that are starving. You have people that can't get basic drugs for diabetes, for other diseases that they will die of if they don't get this medication. So it is a monumental disaster, and our country is playing a role in it, and I just think that is wrong. So we're just trying to get the U.S. to extricate itself from Yemen, and we have bipartisan support. So hopefully you know some about Yemen. If you want to learn more, you can read about it through the internet and so on, but it's just not a topic that a lot of people talk about. So with that, don't want to depress all of you. So I'm going to end on some happier notes, which is that our economy is doing well, and that is a good thing. And it's a good thing that we can put more people back to work. I believe, and this has been stated many times before me, that the best social welfare program is a good job. So thank you for what you all do in helping that. And thank you again for having me here, and look forward to working with all of you as we make the South Bay an even better place to live, work, and play.
This probably will come as no surprise, but we have a card and a gift for you. Congressman Lieu, thank you for making time again for some very important, albeit sobering, but critical issues that we should be aware of. Thank you.
So John said Congressman Waters and I are going to take some questions. I just want to note we worked it out, and Maxine takes the harder questions.
So we have a few minutes. We can take a couple of questions. There's no wireless mic on the floor, but if you raise your hand and speak up, we'll take advantage of this fantastic opportunity. Who has a question? We have one in the back.
Yes.
Real loud.
Congressman Lieu, your children are in this Torrance school district, and I am personally concerned about the cybersecurity of children on school computers and online services. I know you were talking about cybersecurity, but specifically the laws for FERPA and COPA, which are meant to protect children, were demoted, so to speak, or eviscerated in 2011. So I would like you to please concentrate, or at least take a look at how those laws are no longer applicable to our children when they get online and have third-party providers selling our children's data. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think I'm going to ask my wife about that too. But let me make one point on that. So that's a great point you make. It's sort of related. So when I was in the California State Legislature, I also worked on a bill on cyberbullying of children. So in the past, let's say before the internet, the way people got bullied is it was sort of you and your friends and other folks, and if a bullying incident happened, some folks would know about it. The difference with the internet now is you could, let's say, take a very shameful photograph, and then 1,000 people would know about it within an hour. So the ability to sort of get a lot of people aware of something that would make a student feel really horrible, has put a lot of pressure now on kids in a way that didn't exist just a few decades ago. So we'll look at those issues. Thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Yes.
Congresswoman, you mentioned about easing up loans for residential, homeless, and people who are underprivileged. What about businesses? Commercial loans as to spur more activity, economic growth. Are they going to make it a little bit more easier to get loans and more lenient and work with businesses better? Programs.
Thank you very much. As you know, the banks and financial institutions have the ability to create products and charge you what they'd like to charge you for those products. The only way to get the banks and financial institutions paying more attention to the needs of the people and creating products that make good sense and not products that basically trick people into signing on the dotted line and they not knowing what they're signing up for, is to have the members of Congress, your representatives, face to face with the CEOs of the major banks and financial institutions, where we talk to them about our desire to have fairness in the system. And of course, we have the power to deal with regulations or deregulations. And so Dodd-Frank Reforms was that effort to help bring the major financial institutions to the point of negotiation that would help them to understand that we are serious about having fairness in lending. And so the banks are in good shape right now. They're making a lot of money. As a matter of fact, with the president's tax reform, they now have billions of dollars because, as you know, the top 1% benefited mightily from the tax reforms. And so we expect them to be fair. We are talking with them. We are going to meet with them. I'm going to have all of the CEOs of the big banks in my committee in a few weeks. And we are going to have them answer questions about their practices. And we are going to encourage them to come up with products and ways by which the average person who works every day, pays their bills, should be able to get a mortgage. And so we're going to work very hard on that and push very hard and punish very hard if they don't do it.
We have time for just one more. There's one.
Thank you. Congressman Lieu, you talked about the legal challenges to the state of emergency. Can you say anything about whether Congress is addressing the Trump administration's use of eminent domain to take private property and right now to actually bulldoze the butterfly reserve in Texas?
That's a great point. So eminent domain would be a separate legal challenge to the actual physical locations where they want to build either a wall or fence or barriers. Something else you might want to think about is the reason that no construction has started essentially on the wall is a lot of our borders actually have natural features already where you don't need a wall. So you don't need 2,000 miles, right, from sea to sea of a wall. And what actually ended up happening is the Department of Homeland Security sort of said, okay, well, here's sort of like 55 miles where we might need some more stuff. That's why government was funded that way last week with the new money going to essentially just 55 miles. But within that, you're going to have some eminent domain issues as well. Congresswoman Waters knows a lot about the eminent domain issues. I'm going to have her answer that.
Eminent domain is a big issue. As a matter of fact, my conservative side of me opposes eminent domain. And I know all the mayors and folks who are concentrated on economic development don't like that. But I have always been very concerned about the takings of properties, particularly residences, as we have seen in some cases in the past. The President of the United States, as a developer, has a long history of being involved in eminent domain in order to build or create businesses, taking people's homes, etc. So what I did was I read a long history about eminent domain as it relates to the border. And it is a serious issue in that we have some small farmers and residents along the border who have been fighting eminent domain at different times in different ways in this country. And so now they're frightened. Many of them are very frightened because the president is talking about the use of eminent domain as he goes about building this wall. There will be some resistance to that by the people who are living along the border. But one of the things we must understand is the president does not really understand the terrain. He wants to put a fence in the water and on the mountaintop, and it just doesn't work that way. It is not a flat land that you just go and build a big wall on. It is a terrain that has, mountains and rivers and valleys and on and on and on. So in addition to not being able to build a straight wall in the way that he's talking about, and I don't know how many miles he's talking about now, you have the eminent domain problem where if enough of the people get together and they challenge him on top of the lawsuits that the 15 entities already have going, he's going to have a fight on his hand. And let me just say this, and I think that it was alluded to. We do something called a resolution of disapproval about this emergency, and we will take it up in the House. If we take it up in the House, according to the Constitution, the Senate has to take it up. And so the Senate can take it up, and they can agree with us or they can disagree with us. The president certainly does not have to sign it, but the fact of the matter is that led by our own Attorney General, Javier Becerra, working with the other states and entities like the ACLU and those, the lawsuits are going to be so terrific and so awesome until I don't think he's going to be able to get it done. And I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause again. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congressman Ted Lieu. So in the long list of special guests we had that shared earlier, I omitted one. I apologize. City Clerk of Gardena, Mina Semenza, is here. And to keep the circulation going in your hands, we're going to quickly thank the Chamber champions for supporting this event. At the end of this list, please show your appreciation. American Honda Motor Company, Kaiser Permanente, Southern California Edison, the Daily Breeze, Black Knight Patrol, Cal State University Dominguez Hills, where we are right now, the Doubletree by Hilton, Torrance South Bay, Ganal Lumber, Connecta Federal Credit Union, Pelican Products, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Torrance Memorial Medical Center, Torrance Refining Company, and UCLA Health. Please show your appreciation. Thank you to the Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce members who showed up today, and especially to those prospective members. We heard about one earlier. Thanks for coming. Let's give a big thank you to Linda Amato and the Doubletree staff for their professionalism and hospitality. Thanks to the Daily Breeze for covering the event, to our very own Torrance City Cable for airing this event. And again, as you saw when you entered and during the event, Donna and the Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce staff for their management, again, of a well-run and well-attended event. Thank you, Donna and team. For all the chamber champions I listed, as well as the past chairs that we recognized earlier, the centerpieces are for you to take. And that concludes today's event. I'm going to ask the past chairman to join Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Ted Lieu on the stage for a photo. Thank you very much. Be safe.